In the winter haze of 1942, as gray Atlantic waves swallowed Allied convoys and German divisions advanced with terrifying precision, a quiet crisis unfolded far from the front lines. Inside a cramped office in Washington, a man the military had once dismissed as unfit for field duty stared at a mountain of intercepted German messages. Millions of characters of cold, uncrackable code commanders begged for answers. Lives depended on patterns no one could see. And yet, this soft-spoken American mathematician, burdened by failure, ignored by officers who thought him too fragile for war, was about to build the analytic engine that would reveal Germany's next move before the first shot was fired. His name was William Friedman, and this is the story of how a rejected genius reshaped the fate of a world burning in war. Long before generals knew his name, William Friedman stood alone in a dim corridor at the War Department, clutching a thin folder of mathematical proofs that no one had asked for. The smell of oil lamps and old paper filled the air. Secretaries rushed past him without a glance. To them, he was just another civilian volunteer, short, nervous, and already showing the fatigue of a man who had spent too many nights wrestling with questions no one else cared to ask. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't an officer, he wasn't even a trained cryptanalyst by military standards. He was a botanist turned mathematician who had studied the genetics of plants. And in the chaos of early World War II, the Army had almost turned him away entirely. He remembered the sting of that moment, the recruiting officer's voice echoing in the hall. "You're not what we need. This war will be fought with steel, guns, and men who can carry them." Friedman had nodded politely, but inside something cracked. He knew numbers better than he knew people. He knew that codes, like genes, followed patterns, mutations, hidden structures, waiting to be uncovered. He knew he could help. But in a world preparing for tanks and bombers, who cared about a man whose battlefield was a sheet of encrypted text? What the Army didn't understand, what even Friedman didn't yet fully realize, was that wars are not only won by force, they are won by foresight. Months later, after Pearl Harbor, as the United States scrambled to understand German communication networks, someone finally opened the folder he had left behind. The tone in Washington changed almost overnight. The mathematician they had rejected was quietly summoned, ushered through guarded doors, and placed in a room stacked with intercepted Enigma traffic. No instructions, no machine, just pages of symbols that seemed to dance in meaningless chaos. And yet, to Friedman's analytical eye, they whispered something. Tiny irregularities, repeated structures, clues buried beneath the noise of war. The work was suffocating. Days blurred into nights, the clatter of typewriters mixed with the low hum of fluorescent lamps. Cigarette smoke floated in thick layers above rows of analysts who wrestled with ciphers until their fingers cramped. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Friedman would walk the aisle between desks, listening to the rustle of paper, the quiet muttering of analysts talking to themselves, trying to hold on to sanity while staring into the abyss of encrypted German command traffic. At times, doubt poured over him like ice water. The enormity of the task felt inhuman. The British had been working on Enigma for years. Their breakthroughs at Bletchley Park were legendary, driven by brilliant minds and machines already miles ahead. The United States, by comparison, was late, unprepared, and overwhelmed. But the German war machine did not wait for anyone. Every minute, the codes remained unbroken. Allied ships were being torpedoed, Allied pilots ambushed, Allied soldiers marched into traps they never saw coming. Friedman felt the weight of every one of those losses. His hands sometimes shook as he sorted through new intercepts. He feared he wasn't fast enough, smart enough, that the Army had been right about him after all. But each time that fear tightened around him, something deeper pulled him forward. A stubborn faith that structure existed, that the Germans were not gods, that even the most ruthless machinery of war ran on human assumptions. And humans made mistakes. Slowly, silently, Friedman began mapping those mistakes. He built statistical models by hand, charting frequencies, anomalies, operational habits hidden inside German radio discipline. Where others saw gibberish, he saw fingerprints. Tiny deviations that revealed how operators behaved when they were tired, rushed, or afraid. And with each breakthrough, he pushed the Army towards something it had never truly believed in, a machine-driven system of predictive cryptanalysis. not just reading German messages, but anticipating them. His colleagues watched as he filled chalkboards with sprawling diagrams, loops of logic, mathematical traps, predictive pathways that seemed impossible at first glance. They watched him translate intuition into engineering blueprints, urging the military to construct electromechanical analyzers that could transform raw intercepts into foresight machines that could reveal troop movements before they happen. For the first time, the chaos began to shift. For the first time, the fog of war thinned, but even as the models formed, a new terror settled in. What if he was wrong? What if the patterns he saw were illusions? What if the predictions he built, predictions commanders were beginning to rely on, led men into disaster? Every night as he left the building, the same thought haunted him. What if the numbers fail me? What if they fail them? He would soon learn that fear is not the enemy of courage. It is the spark that pushes ordinary people to do extraordinary things. The turning point began on a night so quiet that Friedman could hear the hum of his own heartbeat in the empty hallway. It was past midnight when a courier arrived, arrived, pale-faced and trembling, carrying a stack of German intercepts, unlike anything they had seen before. These messages weren't routine logistical chatter. They were encrypted orders sent between high-level Wehrmacht commands, dense, rapid, time-sensitive. Something was moving on the Eastern Front, something big. Every hour of delay meant thousands of unseen soldiers marching toward an objective the Allies couldn't guess. Friedman spread the pages across his desk, each one a cold sheet of impenetrable symbols, each one an echo of impending violence. His pencil tapped against the wood. His pulse quickened. "We can't keep doing this by hand," he whispered to the empty room. The war was accelerating faster than human eyes could track. Even the brightest analysts were drowning in data. And suddenly it hit him. Maybe the mistake wasn't in the messages. Maybe the mistake was believing humans could keep up with them. For years he had nurtured a quiet idea, an analytical engine built not from genius alone, but from gears, switches, relays, and logic circuits. A machine that could sift through thousands of permutations in minutes. A machine that could run the statistical traps he designed without fatigue, without doubt, without missing a single anomaly in the blizzard of German radio traffic. He had proposed it once, gently, almost apologetically. The army brushed it aside. Too expensive, too uncertain, too strange. But as he examined those new intercepts, he felt something shift inside him. Something like defiance, like resolve hardened by the memory of every soldier who had walked into an ambush because the Allies were blind. No more. Not if he could help it. The next morning, he burst into a meeting of officers who had long underestimated him. The room smelled of coffee, sweat, and the metal tang of tension maps covered every wall. Conversations stopped when they saw Friedman's expression. Eyes sharp, hands trembling with urgency. He laid out the intercepts on the conference table. Then he began to speak. His voice was low but unwavering. He explained that Germany was changing its communication rhythms, tightening procedures, rotating keys faster than before. Human analysis alone would soon collapse under the weight. He told them the truth they didn't want to hear. We will fall behind. And when we do, we will lose ships, cities, and men we could have saved. Silence fell heavy. Some officers frowned. Some crossed their arms. A few looked away, unwilling to imagine the implications. But one of them, a tired intelligence commander who had spent nights staring at casualty reports, leaned forward. "What do you propose, Mr. Friedman?" He took a breath. "We build a machine." He described an electromechanical system that could process sequential patterns faster than any team of analysts, a device that could recognize German habits buried in encrypted noise, a machine that could, in effect, predict where German command signals were leading, before the German units even arrived. At first, the idea sounded like madness, but war has a way of clearing the fog around necessity. And as Friedman laid out his diagrams, circuits looping like the sinews of a new nervous system, something incredible happened. The skepticism in the room softened. Curiosity flickered. Doubt trembled against the possibility of hope. Approval came with conditions, strict deadlines, limited resources, and a warning. If this failed, it would be on him. That night, as he stepped into the cold Washington air, The world around him felt split in two. On one side, a destructive force that seemed unstoppable. On the other, a fragile blueprint scribbled by a man who had once been told he didn't belong here. The next weeks unfolded like a fever dream. Engineers scrambled through workshops filled with sparks, solder, and the metallic scent of hot wire. Friedman supervised every bolt, every relay, every circuit connection. Problems exploded daily: faulty switches, overloaded coils, misaligned timing drums. Each setback felt like another crack in his confidence. Sometimes he sat on a wooden crate, head in his hands, wondering if he was chasing a phantom born from exhaustion. But then he'd remember the fresh graves on distant shores. He'd see the faces of analysts staring at unsolvable pages, and the fear inside him would ignite again, not as paralysis, but as fuel. Slowly, painfully, the machine took shape. It was not elegant. It was not seamless. It clattered, sparked, hissed, and groaned like a wounded animal. But when the final test arrived, when they fed it the newest German intercepts, ones that had baffled the analysts for weeks, the room held its breath. The machine whirred to life. Lights flickered. Gears clicked like the ticking of an ominous clock. The sound grew louder, steadier, until suddenly it stopped. A single result card dropped into the tray. Friedman picked it up with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the numbers. His breath caught in his throat. For the first time, they had a prediction. Not just a decoded fragment, but a forecast of German troop repositioning along a critical sector of the Eastern Front, something the Allies hadn't seen coming, something that could shift entire strategies. It worked. For a moment, the room stayed silent. Then the realization spread. The analysts leaned in. The officers stared. And in the middle of the chaos, Friedman felt his knees weaken. Not from triumph, but from relief so powerful it nearly bent him to the floor. He had built the machine they didn't believe in. A machine born from rejection, fear, and relentless conviction. A machine that would soon begin reshaping the intelligence war. And yet, he knew this was only the beginning. The storm was still coming. The Germans were still moving. And the machine he had created, his machine, was about to be tested against the most ruthless, adaptable military system on Earth. The first success should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a warning, because almost immediately, Friedman realized the terrifying truth. Germany was evolving too. Their radio discipline tightened. Their encryption keys rotated faster. Their operators, aware that the Allies might be listening, shifted to new habits meant to blur the very patterns Friedman relied on. Every time they adapted, the machine fell a step behind. And every time it fell behind, the war crept closer to disaster. The intelligence rooms grew heavier with pressure. The air smelled of burnt dust and hot wiring as the machine ran day and night, chewing through streams of encrypted messages. The clatter of relays became a constant backdrop. Loud, metallic, almost desperate analysts worked in shifts, their eyes red, their fingers stained with ink, from scribbling calculations long after their minds should have given out. In the middle of it all, Friedman drifted like a ghost, never raising his voice, never slowing down, carrying the weight of every outcome the machine produced, and everyone it couldn't. One morning, a report slammed onto his desk. A German U-boat wolf pack moving in the North Atlantic, a convoy of Allied ships, hundreds of men and thousands of tons of supplies, steamed directly toward them. The machine had processed the intercepts but hesitated. The signals were inconsistent. Fragmented patterns hinted at danger, but uncertainty clouded the prediction. Command wanted clarity. Lives demanded certainty. Friedman felt sweat gathering at the back of his neck as he stared at the output reels, his mind racing through probabilities like a man fighting drowning waters. What if he was wrong? What if he warned them and it turned out to be nothing? Or worse, what if he said nothing and those ships vanished beneath black waves? Inside that moment of fear, he felt again the echo of being dismissed years earlier, the voice telling him he wasn't what the army needed. And he realized something painful. He still feared they might be right. Hands trembling, he made the call. He told Naval Command to reroute the convoy. Minutes later, the message flashed across the radio network. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Friedman paced the floor, replaying every calculation in his head, haunted by the possibility that he had gambled the credibility of his entire operation on a fragile thread of numbers. Then the report arrived. German U-boats, lying in wait exactly where the convoy had been scheduled to pass, found nothing but empty water. Allied ships arrived safely in port days later. The machine had been right. Friedman had been right. But instead of triumph, he felt a gnawing dread curling inside him. Because prediction was no longer a tool. It was a responsibility, a dangerous one. The closer the machine came to foreseeing German movements, the more the Allied war effort leaned on its existence, on him, and the more unbearable the weight became. As weeks passed, their predictive capacity sharpened. IBM punch card tabulators fed the machine faster than any human team could. Analysts learned to read the behavior of German operators through tiny imperfections Friedman mapped with eerie precision. They spotted hints of impending offensives days before reconnaissance planes could intercept about fuel shipments revealed where panzer divisions would mass. Subtle shifts in radio silence warned of armored movement long before footsteps hit the ground. Every insight saved lives. Every prediction altered strategy. And yet, every success carved deeper lines into Friedman's face. Because the Germans were not unaware, their systems shifted again. More erratic, more cautious, almost as if they sensed an invisible hand unraveling their secrets. In late 1943, a chilling pattern appeared. Abrupt bursts of encrypted traffic near a region where the Soviets feared an attack. But the messages were inconsistent, scattered like static. Analysts were split. Some believed it was genuine, others feared it was deliberate misdirection. Command demanded a single voice. Friedman's heart hammered as he hovered over the machine's output. The numbers pointed toward a feint, a trick designed to lure Allied attention away from another sector, but the margin of error was razor thin. One wrong call could doom tens of thousands. He felt a flash of exhaustion, the kind that blurs the edges of vision. He remembered the days when he had worked on plant genetics, when his greatest worry had been the mutation rate of barley seeds. How distant that world seemed now. War had dragged him to a place where numbers were no longer abstract. They were lives measured in columns of probability. Finally, with a voice barely above a whisper, he gave his judgment. He was right again. The real attack struck elsewhere, exactly where the machine had predicted. And Allied support repositioned in time to reinforce the Soviet line. Another disaster avoided. Another confirmation that the world had come to rely on the mind of one man and the machine he forced into existence. But as the war intensified, the psychic toll grew relentless. Some nights, Friedman would sit in his office long after everyone left, staring at walls covered in signals, charts, and maps. The machine hummed in the next room, a creature of steel and logic that never slept, never doubted, never carried the burdens he did. He envied it and feared it, because every success raised the stakes. Every breakthrough meant Germany would adapt again. And each time they did, he felt the cold certainty that someday, somehow, the machine would fail him. And when it did, it would not be a minor mistake. It would be catastrophic. He didn't know when it would happen, but he felt it coming like a storm building silently beyond the horizon. The collapse began without warning. One morning in early 1944, as analysts filtered into the operations room clutching coffee and fatigue, they noticed something strange. An eerie quiet in the intercept log's German radio channels, normally alive with encrypted chatter, had gone almost completely silent. The few signals that did appear were unlike anything they had seen before. New formats, new structures, new timing. Sharp, clipped bursts that offered no rhythm, no pattern, no foothold for analysis. It was as if the German command structure had shed its old skin overnight. Friedman felt his chest tighten as he held the first printout. The symbols were too clean, too precise. His stomach dropped. The Germans hadn't simply changed habits, they had changed systems. A new cipher architecture, likely tied to upgraded Enigma procedures and transmission equipment, had arrived on the battlefield, and overnight the machine he had built, the entire predictive model that had guided Allied strategy for months, had been reduced to a blind, grinding mass of gears, unable to find a single thread of meaning. In the operations room, fear spread fast. Analysts whispered to each other, their voices sharp with anxiety. Officers demanded updates. Technicians tore through wiring, hoping the failure was mechanical. But Friedman knew better. The problem wasn't the machine, it was the enemy. He stepped into the hallway, leaning against the cold wall as a wave of dizziness washed over him. He had always known the Germans would change, but he had hoped, quietly, desperately, that it would happen slowly enough for them to adapt. Now the war had shifted in a single night, slipping out from under his grasp like sand spilling between his fingers. And for the first time since the machine had come alive, he felt powerless. By noon, intelligence reports confirmed the scale of the crisis. Soviet scouts on the Eastern Front were reporting sudden movements. Allied lines in Italy were bracing for a counteroffensive. U-boats were reappearing along unexpected routes. The world was shifting, and Friedman's team was deaf to the signals that monitored its pulse. The responsibility crashed onto him with unbearable force. He sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of intercepts, dead text, lifeless patterns, the starlight of a sky he no longer understood. His hands trembled as he lifted page after page. Nothing made sense. The mathematical rhythms he once trusted had evaporated. And inside him, the old fear, the fear of being the wrong man in the wrong place, roared back with merciless clarity. For the first time, he wondered if he had pushed too far, built something the Allies had come to depend on too completely. Had he created not a tool, but a fragile illusion of control? Had he set them up for a failure even deadlier than the chaos that came before? The crisis intensified by the hour. High command demanded answers. Generals paced the hall outside, their footsteps sharp, impatient, echoing through the thin walls. Lives were at stake. Convoys leaving tonight, divisions repositioning tomorrow. Pilots flying missions blind. Every minute lost meant more soldiers heading into uncertainty. That night, exhausted analysts drifted home, but Friedman stayed behind. He sat alone with the machine, just the two of them in the dim glow of desk lamps. The machine's metallic frame felt colder than usual, as if it too were mourning its own helplessness. He touched the side panel gently, his fingers brushing against the rivets. This machine had been built from his stubborn faith, from nights of doubt and grit. Now it stood before him silent, confused, defeated. He closed his eyes and asked himself the question he had avoided for months. What if the enemy evolves faster than the tools built to track them? What if the future cannot be predicted? Then, slowly, quietly, something shifted inside him. He thought of his earliest days analyzing plant genetics, systems that evolved under pressure, organisms that changed form when threatened. The lesson had always been the same. Adaptation is not an event. It is a process. And every process, no matter how complex, leaves traces. He snapped upright. If the Germans had truly changed everything, then something would be inconsistent. Some operator would slip, some unit would revert to habit, some transmission would reflect old rhythm. Not because they were careless, but because they were human. And humans always leave fingerprints. He rushed back to the intercept room, pulling down crates of older messages. Hours passed in a blur. His pencil scratched violently across paper as he compared pre-changed signals to the new bursts. He charted frequency anomalies, timing irregularities, operator-specific quirks so subtle they were almost invisible. One by one, patterns emerged, not in the text but in behavior, not in the cipher but in the men behind the radios. By dawn, with bloodshot eyes and ink-stained hands, he found it, a hidden hinge, a narrow statistical weakness buried in the transmission protocols themselves, a quirk in how certain German operators handled time compression under pressure. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough to crack the new system, but it was enough to build a bridge, enough to feed the machine a foothold. He raced to wake the technicians. The machine sputtered back to life with a strained hum, punching through new permutations built around Friedman's discovery. Hours later, a partial breakthrough emerged. Early warning of German repositioning near the Anzio front. The prediction was incomplete, fragile, almost brittle, but it was enough. Enough to prepare, enough to shift reinforcements, enough to save lives. The silence had been broken, but Friedman didn't feel triumph. He felt something quieter, more solemn, because he knew the battle was far from over. The Germans would change again. He would have to adapt again. and every cycle would carry a heavier cost. He wasn't just fighting the enemy anymore. He was fighting time itself.